Yes, our God is a mountain mover, and He's still moving mountains every day. And the good news is, He can move your mountains too. Hi there, this is Sue Cooper. Welcome to It's a God Thing radio program. Thanks for joining us today. You're about to hear some awesome interviews with believers in Jesus Christ who will tell you how God has revealed and proved Himself to them by moving mountains they were unable to move by themselves. They say that their stories can only be described as a God thing. Ready for a blessing? Let's roll. Here's our host, Chuck Cooper, with a great God thing story.
Thank you, honey. Clare Kimmel of Blairsville, Georgia, has a very compelling and inspiring story to share with us today. You see, when Clare was 8, her parents divorced, and her mother abandoned her. As a 13-year-old, her father also abandoned her, leaving her to fend for herself. And as a young married adult, Clare endured a brutally abusive marriage and survived 3 different attempts by her alcoholic husband to kill her. Only her faith in God and a miraculous event saved her life. Thanks so much for being with us today, Clare. We are really eager to hear your God thing story.
One morning when I was 8 years old, we got up to go to school, and my parents told us at breakfast that they were going to get a divorce, and that when we got home from school, they wanted to know who we wanted to live with.
Oh, my goodness.
So they didn't, this is not a decision a child should have made. At the end of the day, I asked my sister what she had decided, and which I already knew. She said she was going to live with my dad because she was my dad's pride and joy. So I told her I was going to live with her wherever she went. So we both told them that we wanted to live with Daddy, and my mother got up and walked out of the house and left. And she had found another man to live with. And then my dad shipped us off to boarding school. So we spent the rest of that year in boarding school. And then later, when we were teenagers, moved to Daytona. And my dad was a person, we lived in a housing project, and my dad was a person who couldn't work for anybody. He could be the boss, but he couldn't work for anybody else. I looked like my mother, so if I was 5 minutes late getting in the house, he would be at the door screaming that I was nothing but a whore, just like my mother was. And he, one day, because I was late, locked me in my bedroom for 3 days, and finally the neighbor came over and said, if you don't let her out, I'm going to call the police and have them...
And you were 8 years old?
No, at that time I was like 13.
Oh, okay.
So all through my whole high school years, I was never good enough for my dad because I looked like my mom. My sister left after she graduated from high school. My father had found out that she was having an affair with her boss, which upset him because my father had a hierarchy, and it was the Blessed Virgin and then my sister, and she was going to be a nun all her life, and then he found out that this was happening. So she left, and I lived with my dad for that year, for the summer, and then he told me that he was going to give up the apartment or the housing project because he couldn't afford it, and he was going to go live with his girlfriend, and that I could do whatever I wanted to do. I could find myself a place to live, or if I wanted to quit school, that he would keep the apartment. And so I called my mother, and she told me that she couldn't take me in because my sister was there. She didn't have room for me. So that was the second time in my life that my mother would not take me or didn't want me. And so I had been to Atlanta that year over the Christmas holidays to visit a friend of mine, and I had met a family up here, and I called them, and they took me in so I could complete my high school education. And then after I got out of high school, I lived in an apartment with some friends, and then we moved back to to the Allens' home, the people that had took me in, and I met my first husband, Jeff, and he told me that he loved me and told me that he needed me, which nobody had ever really told me they loved me before, so I married him. I was raised Catholic, and all of my family drank, so I didn't know the difference between taking a drink and being an alcoholic.
Oh, my.
And he was an alcoholic. His father was a Baptist minister. During the course of our marriage, he wasn't a drinker that drank every day. He would binge drink. And one time we went to Sears. I worked at Sears, and we went there one night to get something, and he said, I'm going to go to the hardware store. I couldn't find what I needed. And I said, okay. So when the store closed, I went out, and he wasn't anywhere to be found. And I went up the street, and he wasn't up there. The hardware store was closed. And at that time, he was taking a medication for alcoholics that if you drank, it would make you sick. So I went back, and I told the guard at Sears, if somebody comes back here Well, 6 months later, he came home half
My
dead. He had
goodness.
almost drunk himself to death. And I left twice. He tried to kill me one night when right after my son was born. He tied me to the kitchen door and threw knives at me. And then
Close did he come?
pretty close. I left, and then his father talked me into coming back, and I came back to him. And one night we went to a place up on Lake Lanier, which at that time was like out of town from
Right.
Atlanta. This was in the 60s. And he had what I later found out was called an alcoholic stroke, and he couldn't walk on his legs at all. But when I got up close to him, I was trying to help him, and he knocked me down and got a hold of me and was trying to choke me, and I finally got away from him. And I got us back to town, and I left again, and his father talked me into going back. And then finally I had just had enough. I couldn't do any more. He one time was drinking Polly Peachtree aftershave lotion, and anything that he could get that had alcohol in it.
Claire, were you active in church at that time?
I was going. His father was a minister, the
Right.
Baptist minister, and yes, we were going to the church, and I had been saved at his church, but they kept talking me into coming back, and unfortunately, I had no family up here in Georgia, and of course, I had alienated myself from my friends because I didn't want them to know what was going on in my life. I was going to Al-Anon.
Mm-hmm.
And I also had been to a court-appointed psychiatrist, and he had told me, he said, your problem is because he's telling you that he loves you, you're coming back, and you need to get away from this. And so I finally decided that I was going to leave him.
How tough was that?
It was very hard because
Did you love him?
Yes, I did. And at one time when my son was real little, I had come home at night after going out getting away because he was drinking, and I found him in the bedroom, and the bed was on fire.
My gosh.
And for just a minute, I thought, I'll just walk out. Nobody will know that I came back home. But I couldn't do it. I drug him off the bed and then poured buckets of water on the mattress. He had been smoking in bed, and the bed was on fire. So I had saved him then. When I finally decided I couldn't handle it anymore, I went to Al-Anon one night, and I told him that I was leaving, that was it. I wouldn't be back to Al-Anon. I was getting a divorce. My church, at that time I was going to a Presbyterian church, and the minister had gotten me a lawyer. And I was in the process of getting a divorce. At that time, he had been in jail several times, and he was back in jail for breaking probation. And so my son was at my dad's apartment. My dad had moved up to Georgia at the time, and I was trying to help take care of my dad. And I had left my son over there, and I went home and I went in the house and locked the door and put the chain lock on. And when I was going to the bedroom, I hadn't turned the lights on, and I thought, I can smell alcohol. And then I thought, oh, no, you're crazy. You don't smell anything. And I turned the bedroom light on, and he was sitting on the bed. I don't know how he got out of jail or who got him out.
Oh, my.
His father had gotten him out many, many times. He said, I told you that if you ever tried to divorce me, I would kill you, and that's what I'm here for.
Mm.
So I went back out in the living room. It was a small apartment, and I thought, I don't know how I'm going to get out of here. I got the chain lock on. So he came out in the kitchen, and he got out 3 knives out of the drawer and put them on the table. And he remembered that he had opened a window in the bedroom. It was October, and it was cold out, so he went in to shut the window, and I thought, this is my only chance to get away.
Thank goodness for that open window.
Yes, and I just hit the door running. I had a dress on. I had pulled my dress up. As soon as I got outside, I started screaming, please call the police. He's trying to kill me. And we lived in an apartment complex where the apartments were kind of shaped like an E without the middle. And I looked straight across, and I could see one door open. And I thought, well, I've got to run there. As I was running across there and screaming, I had seen another door open to my left, but I couldn't cut back because I knew he could get me.
Was he chasing you?
Yes. And just as I hit their front sidewalk, he hit me from behind and knocked me down. And I heard the man in the apartment say, shut the door, we don't want to get involved in this.
Oh, my.
So he got a hold of me, and he was dragging me back across the compound. I thought my kneecap was broken because it was all bloody, and he tore my dress down the back. As we were coming back across the other door that I had seen open, the guy came out with a gun, and he said, let her go. If you don't let her go, I'm going to shoot you. And so he let go of me and ran back into my apartment. And as he went through, he took all the money I had in my wallet and ran out the back door. There was a railroad yard down behind our apartments, and he went down there, and the other guy had already called the police, and they came.
Now, did you know this neighbor that had the gun?
No.
Total stranger?
Total stranger.
Heard
He
you
just
screaming
came
and
out
came
and
to your
held me
aid.
screaming, and he had called the police. Well, they came. I packed a suitcase and got in the car, and I had a Volkswagen, and the starter was bad, so the policeman and the neighbor pushed me off, and I popped the clutch and started the car. And I didn't stop at a red light until I was like 3 miles away from
I'll
the
bet.
apartment. And I went to a gas station to make a phone call to call one of my ministers at the church I was going to, and of course found out I didn't have any money. And the guy at the gas station gave me a quarter to make the phone call. And they met me and kept me for 3 days. My leg was all banged up. I know that was only God that got me out of that, because I prayed the whole time that God, don't let him kill me, because my son, I have to take care of my son. So I know that's the only way. I did go through with the divorce, and when I went to my divorce hearing, I had a Volkswagen Bug, and I went with a U-Haul on the back. And I left.
Volkswagen Bug and a U-Haul?
Yeah.
Well, that's quite a combination.
And so after the courthouse hearing, he didn't show up, and the judge just signed the divorce, and I left the courthouse and drove to Florida. And finally, at that point in time, I did go to my mother's, and she took me in. About a year and a half later, he killed his parents and killed himself.
My
One night, he
goodness
shot both
me.
of his parents, and the next morning called his younger brother and said, you need to call the undertaker. And Steve didn't believe him at first, and he hung up on him, and he called him back, and he said, I'm not kidding. I've killed.
Oh, I guess. My gosh. Now,
Been
how
away
old were
from
you
him.
then?
I was 25.
About 25?
Mm-hmm.
And you were still working? I mean, you were working at that point?
I worked. I just left my job and moved back to Florida. And a friend of mine who had known me since I was 5 years old, mother and daddy, I went to him because he had a pizza restaurant and said, can you give me a job in case I can't find a job here?
Right.
But I was able to find a job and to work things out.
My goodness. How were you able to cope with all that?
Really, it was just God taking me through it, because I really wasn't a mature Christian. I mean, I prayed, but I didn't really know that God would deliver me, because I just prayed many times. There was a time I got out of the house. He would never let me take my son. He always sent me to the liquor store, and he let me take my son because he knew I wouldn't come back.
Right.
And one time I came home, and he had cut up every piece of article of clothing and pair of shoes and everything that I owned.
My goodness.
That time I couldn't get my son out for 3 days. He wouldn't let me in the house and wouldn't let the cops in the house.
Now, Claire, you said you weren't a mature Christian at that time. How did that affect your relationship with God?
I think it caused me to lean on him more and more, because at that time I didn't really have anybody. I mean, my dad was there, but my dad was not a Christian. There are some things that happened in my dad's life that I knew he was not a Christian. But that was the only resource in my life that I had that was a comfort. I mean, there were times that I just got down beside the bed and all I could just say was God. I couldn't voice anything else. I would cry, and I couldn't voice any prayers. But I would just say, God, or help me. I know there were several times you hear the verse in Scripture that says the peace that passes all understanding. Right. And there were times that I know the Holy Spirit would just come in and calm me down and enable me to think.
Sure. Did you ever return and find your neighbor that rescued you?
No, I didn't. Okay. For a long time, I never went back to Atlanta.
Well, you didn't want to go back. No. How's your relationship with the Lord now?
I have a very strong relationship with the Lord. He brought me to First Baptist Church of Indian Rocks. And a woman that I started to co-teach a Sunday school class, and her mother really mentored me. I mean, she was a strong Christian, and she really mentored me for a long time. And I was able through those years to grow. I taught a women's class, and I was able to help them. I one time led a battered women's class, but I told the pastor when I took it over, if they are going through bad abuse, I will not tell them to stay. I will tell them to leave.
Sure.
Because no woman has to put up with that.
No.
There are many women and people say to me, why didn't you leave earlier? I was deathly afraid of him. I knew what he was capable of, and I was very afraid of him. And his parents, his mother used to say to me, "Well, you must have done something to make him hit you." I always wondered the night I always wondered the night that he killed her if she thought, "Well, Claire,
yes,
you were right."
Well, Claire, we know that one of your gifts is prayer. You are a very avid and stout prayer warrior. And I mean that in the kindest terms. And because you pray constantly for people in our class and for other folks, I'm assuming that your insistence on prayer, your belief in prayer, your practice in prayer was triggered by all this that happened to you and how God supported you even when you didn't know how to pray.
And I think that's true. And there's no greater joy to me than to be able to, I have a big prayer list, and my war room is actually my recliner. But there's nothing that pleases me more than to take my blue marker and put praise for answered prayer and mark that one off the list.
So you keep a journal?
Yes, I do. Mm-hmm.
Oh, good for you. Would you call all that happened to you and where you are now with the Lord and where you are now in your life here in North Georgia, that all that was a God thing?
Oh, absolutely.
Thank you, Claire. Mm-hmm. Wow, what a great story. I don't know about you, but we here at It's a God Thing Radio are inspired and encouraged and even awed when we hear stories like the one you're hearing today. We think God Thing stories prove to all who hear them how God continues to work every day in the lives of His believers. We also believe strongly that sharing God Thing stories with not yet believers might just cause them to remember similar events in their own lives. Hopefully, those remembrances will cause them to consider that there may be something to God and Jesus after all. Sharing your own God Thing story, yes, your own story, is a great way to witness to your family, friends, co-workers, schoolmates, and even strangers. Who won't listen when you begin a conversation by saying, "My goodness, you won't believe what happened to me a while back," or, "Gosh, I'm so excited about what happened to a couple at our church. Let me tell you about it." Then tell your own story or share one you've heard here. Doing so just might cause someone to accept Jesus as Savior and Lord. Now let's get back to today's program. We'd like to welcome Frank Rosendahl from Ham Lake, Minnesota as our guest today. Frank said something to me the other day that really sort of set me back. What he said was, Chuck, if it weren't for my wife and the Lord, today I would probably be an alcoholic.
Correct.
Frank, why would you say such a thing, or tell us why you believe that?
Well, I'd already been in the Marine Corps and spent three years with them, 20 months in Japan, so I was away from friends and loved ones.
Sure.
For that time. So I did a lot of carousing. I was a heathen to the core. I was a heathen as far as it could go, and did a lot of running around and a lot of everything. Well, we got back to after I got out of the service, a buddy of mine and we were racing cars for fun, a way to get rid of our money.
Yeah, okay.
And we were going to have a get together, and it happened to be at a girl's cabin who went to school with my wife.
Mm-hmm.
I was the odd one out. I didn't have anybody for me to be with, and my wife and her girlfriend were on their way to a school play, and my buddy and another friend and his girlfriend, they drove by and asked the girls if they wanted to go to a party. My wife's a Christian, and I don't know what went through her mind, but somehow she said, yeah, I'll make something different for her, I guess. So she showed up, and we ended up paired together. We had a decent evening together and talking, and I was half drunk, if not further, by then. She told me that she didn't know if she should be around me because of what I was. And I said, why? She said, well, I'm a born-again believer. I said, well, what?
Uh-huh.
I said, I didn't know that much about that at the time. She said, yeah. But I asked her if we could see her again. She said, sure. Oh, well. So she gave me her phone number, and we went out on a couple dates, and then I started getting kind of serious for me. I'm 5 years older than my wife, so I've been around where she hadn't been, and she was senior in high school. I sort of said, for me it wasn't kidding, but I think she thought it was. And I said, will you marry me one of these days? And she said, I can't marry you until you accept the Lord as your Savior. I said, that's a stumbling block.
Yeah, you never encountered that before, had you?
No, never been around a born-again Christian, really, that I know of. Then, so we kept going together, and in 1957 I bought a brand new Buick, and it was my pride and joy.
Sure.
But we were still racing, so we were racing on Wednesdays and Sunday afternoons, so there was no time to go to church. But I still had this new car, and I loved it.
Right.
Quote unquote, I guess.
Yeah.
And then but at Christmas time they had a party I had worked in a warehouse, and they had a Christmas party. So I went to the party, and I got too drunk to drive, but so I was sober enough not to drive.
Right.
So I just left the car there. And when I came to pick it up in the next morning, it was gone. I just figured they hauled it away because it was in the no parking zone for the daytime. But what I had done is left the ignition unlocked and the door unlocked, and somebody had taken it for a joyride.
Oh my goodness.
And they had piled it up. The car had just over 1,000 miles, if that. So I figured if I wasn't drinking, I wouldn't have been that careless.
Right.
So that's how the Lord took drinking away from me. I quit right then.
You quit right then?
I quit right then. I had this church that my wife, or Kathy, was going to, and they were all praying for me, and the power of prayer is great. It really works.
So you lost your car, totaled your car.
Yeah.
And you realized that, again, that if you hadn't been drunk, you probably wouldn't have left the key in the ignition and the doors unlocked.
If I wouldn't have been drinking, I wouldn't even been there to start with.
Yeah, oh, I got you.
So the Lord did take that away from me. And then I smoked too, but I was back to the racing. We were racing all the time, and she kept trying to get me to go to church.
But you couldn't because you were racing.
Because we had time up using for that. So then we had a high-speed miss in the motor, so we were working on that one Saturday afternoon and getting ready for Sunday racing, and the fan blade come sailing out and hit me in the stomach and almost killed me.
Ooh.
So then that took the racing away, because I was done with racing
I bet.
for a while. So then I started going to church while I was healing, and then we quit racing altogether. A year and a half later, after I'd met my wife, and with all the prayer, I was sitting in church one Sunday night after we had a evangelist there the week before.
Mm-hmm.
And he seemed like a down-to-earth man, and we went to just about every meeting that week. But Sunday night we were there, and as I was standing up for closing prayer, the pastor walked by and he says, "Are you ready yet, Frank?" I said, No, I'm
The pastor came to you?
He came by and walked
Called you
down the
out?
aisle. He just walked down the aisle. I said, "Are you ready?" I said, No, I'm not ready. And he probably got about 3 pews down from me, and something, had to be the Lord, pushed me out into the aisle, because my wife's hands were small, and whatever it was caught me across both shoulder blades, pushed me out in the aisle. So I figured, well, the Lord wants me to go forward. So I went forward and accepted the Lord.
My goodness. And you felt this?
I literally felt it being pushed. So then after we got done with that, the service, and I went out, and I was going to have a cigarette to sort of steady my nerves.
Sure.
Quote unquote, if they were, that's what they were. And I couldn't have stuck anything worse in my mouth than that cigarette. It tasted terrible. It was a brand new cigarette, brand new pack, and I just threw them out the window and I quit.
So, and how long a time period was this now before your car was abolished and you quit drinking cold turkey, and then you accepted Christ, and He put a bad taste in your mouth and you quit cold turkey with cigarettes? How long a time period? Between December and September. It was December I quit drinking. The following September I accepted the Lord and quit smoking. Oh boy, about 9 months, 10 months.
Then the following year in August, we got married.
Oh, good for you. But you had a couple conditions before that Kathy laid down.
Correct.
Frank, let me ask you something very personal. Of course, what you've just explained to us is personal. Do you give credit to the Lord for putting Kathy in your path and for arranging for y'all to meet and arranging for her to be, quote, stubborn? I bet you thought she was stubborn, at least initially, in her demands. Did the Lord orchestrate all this for you?
Oh, yes, sure. He's got a plan. He's got a plan for us all. We just got to be able to recognize it when it's in front of us.
And now, how long have you and Kathy been married now?
Just over 50 years.
Oh, bless your heart. Well, she's a sweetheart. And Frank, we appreciate you sharing this personal story with us. It's going to be an encouragement to some of our listeners. And we appreciate that so much. Obviously, Frank, you've got to believe that Kathy was a God thing, that meeting her was a God thing.
Yes, I do, because she has been great for me. I'm glad that the Lord thought enough of me to give me her.
Thank you, Frank.
Thank you.
Well, we're happy to have with us today Anika Williams from Kingston, Jamaica. And she has a really neat story about how God answered a prayer for her very quickly when she was in a time of danger. So welcome to the program, Anika, and tell us this story. This is a great story. Tell us about it.
Oh, my story is about a time when I was coming from school on a rainy day. The place was all jammed with traffic and stuff, and I was taking a cab to go home, and the cab turned off on a road that you could turn off to get to an easier way. And there were other cars turning off on the intersection also. As the car turned off, a gunman ran in the front of in the road and stopped the car. And when I looked at the side, there were two other men with guns standing at the wall. And he stopped the driver and was asking him for money. Meanwhile, the driver was there. And I saw the gun, I started panicking and my heart was beating so fast. I was trying not to look at the gunman because I didn't want him to think that I was trying to identify who he was. And then I realized that the driver took something out of his car and threw it out at the gunman. And same time I looked at the other side, I saw a man pointing his gun towards the car. And then I start to pray in my heart, asking God to cover everyone in the car so that we may live. And then apparently I saw the driver drive off. When I asked the driver what happened, he said he knew one of the gunmen from high school, and he gave them a change so that they would not rob us of all our money and stuff. So I think God had saved my life from not being killed or being robbed. And on the other day, I heard that there were many cars that had turned off on the same road and they are being robbed of many money and jewelry and stuff by the gunmen.
So you were in a car, and how many other people were with you?
There were 3 passengers in the back. I was in the front, so it's 4 of us.
4 of you, and did you know the other people?
No, it was just a taxi that we took to go home.
Okay, so you all got in the same taxi, and
yeah.
You were riding home. Now, did your prayer, did you say it out loud or just in your heart?
No, I said it in my heart because I didn't want anybody to know that I was scared.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I could not show that you were too scared because I guess the gunman would panic and probably attack you.
Yes. So obviously you were very frightened.
Yes, of course.
Yeah.
It's the first time I'm seeing a gun pointing at me. And I didn't even want to look, but I was looking in the corner of my eyes.
Oh, I see.
Because I didn't want the man to see that I was looking at him.
What did the driver say afterwards? Did he say anything to you after?
No, we only asked him if he knew them, and he said he knew one of them.
From high school?
Yeah.
And how much further did you have to go before you got home?
About 20 minutes drive.
And nobody said anything?
Everybody was like talking about how they were scared and they were frightened.
Well, sure.
And what could have happened. And the driver said he was lucky because he had a lot of money in his car, which they could have taken away and stuff.
Well, so it's a good thing that the driver knew the gunman from high school and gave him some money, and so y'all could go on safely.
Yeah.
Well, gosh, that's a great story, Anika, and we appreciate you sharing with us today. Would you say that this was an immediate answer to your prayers?
Oh, yes, it is, because I guess God answered my prayer immediately as I prayed and asked him to cover the car and cover everyone in the car, and to protect us that we may reach home safe.
So you would think this answer to prayer then is a God thing?
Yes.
Wow, what a great half hour this has been. Tune in next time for more great God Thing stories, and tell all your friends to tune in too. Oh yeah, one more thing. If you or someone you know has a verifiable story which needs to be told, please email a brief summary to us at mystory@itsagodthingradio.com. That's my story, all one word, at itsagodthingradio.com.